For 12 days, I treated the mysterious alien woman I found in shuttle wreckage, and when she finally whispered, "You do not know who I really am, human," I told her it did not matter. She was wounded, and I heal wounded people, and something in her eyes broke a little at such a simple answer. Evan wiped sweat from his brow as he meticulously changed the bandages on patient unknown's abdomen. Her violet eyes followed every movement of his hands, unblinking and unnervingly intense. 12 days had passed since she'd been brought to him, an ethereal figure in shuttle wreckage not far from the outpost. She was the first alien Evan had ever treated. Pale silver skin shimmered beneath her bandages despite the grime. Long white hair clung wetly to bloodied cuts on her face and neck. Her eyes darted over his shoulder at a faint noise, perhaps someone entering the medical bay, or just another delirious thought in an injured mind. "You should not have saved me," she whispered suddenly. Evan did not look up. His focus remained fixed on removing old bandages, carefully noting any signs of infection under them before applying fresh dressings soaked with healing salves and antiseptics he'd concocted from local plants and limited supplies. "I am a doctor," Evan replied quietly but firmly, as his fingers worked methodically over her skin. "Saving people is what I do." Patient unknown's eyes narrowed, studying the man before her. She had seen countless leaders and soldiers bow to her status, yet this human treated her without fear or judgment. Something about that was strange and unsettlingly comfortable at once. "You do not know what you saved," she said now, almost as if challenging him despite her obvious weakness. Evan raised his head briefly, meeting those violet eyes with a calm look of understanding but no trace of arrogance in the brown depths staring back. "I know you were dying," Evan countered gently yet resolutely. That was enough. Patient unknown fell silent again for several moments, as if processing this exchange and its implications, which she clearly did not like. "You do not know who I really am, human." Her whisper carried a strange weight to it now, something more than simple words. Evan shrugged slightly without looking up from his work. "Does it matter? You are wounded," he pointed out simply, with no trace of impatience in his voice or body language, as if stating the obvious, which, in truth, was exactly what this whole interaction felt like to him on a very basic level when filtered through all the bizarre circumstances involved. Patient unknown's gaze hardened further, but also softened simultaneously. Her breathing paused for an instant before she replied softly, "It should matter." Evan continued without pause or hesitation. He finished wrapping another section of bandages around her torso and stepped back to take in his handiwork, critically, if not perfectly neat, at least stable, with no signs of renewed bleeding visible so far. "When you are healed," he said calmly, as he made a final adjustment, tucking the edges neatly together over an incision on patient unknown's abdomen that had already begun to close under pressure from Evan's medical ministrations and local healing methods, despite everything working against it. Patient unknown watched him go with barely restrained surprise. The human doctor was leaving so soon. He couldn't possibly be done. Evan turned toward a cabinet containing her medications for today, some more of his concoctions, along with the few standard drugs available at this outpost's limited medical supply. "You can tell me if you want," Evan added softly before disappearing through one door, presumably to retrieve whatever he needed. Patient unknown watched him go, that feeling of something breaking in her chest now fully realized and acknowledged, yet also strangely comforting despite everything else going on around them, both due to the sheer act of being treated like a person instead of an object or a threat. For once, since she could remember, she had a communicator hidden amongst the remains of her belongings brought back from that wreckage site. One signal sent would have Volcari forces here in hours, ready to whisk their empress home, regardless how dangerous this world might be otherwise. Yet today was different somehow, even as patient unknown fought against it with every fiber of her being. No duties, no orders, just rest. She closed her eyes briefly, breathing deeply, an act that had never occurred before now without at least some formality. attached to maintaining appearances and decorum in any case involving herself personally instead of simply stating medical fact. She was used to always being someone else first. This human brought her back as just her for 12 days, and she wanted one more day like this before anything changed ever again. Chapter 2, Day 15. Since patient unknown had been brought to Dr. Evan Cross's outpost medical bay, her wounds healing under his care and determination. By this point, she could walk unassisted, though she moved slowly, her gait cautious due to lingering pain from her injuries. Evan led her out of the medical facility, into a world that was both starkly alien yet strangely familiar. The sky above them stretched endlessly, without clouds or even stars in sight. It was just an expanse of deep blue with hints of pink and purple at dawn's early break, colors she had never seen before on any home planet within her empire's dominion. "This is as far out from civilization as it gets," Evan explained as they made their way across the rocky terrain. "Just me here." Patient unknown nodded silently, but continued to observe everything around them with an intensity that belied her weakened state. She had spent so long as Empress Seraphine Volcari, surrounded by protocol and duty, yet in these moments she felt a strange freedom and anonymity where no one bowed before her or demanded her attention for trivial matters. "Do you miss company?" Patient unknown asked suddenly, watching Evan's profile carefully while he guided them back towards the outpost. Evan paused momentarily to consider his answer before continuing along their path, avoiding sharp stones with practiced ease despite the early light making visibility less than ideal. "Sometimes," he admitted softly, after a moment of contemplation under her steady gaze. Patient unknown noted that there was no reluctance in his words and wondered if this human's life had parallels with her own existence here. Perhaps it simply provided stark contrast to what she knew before now. "But there is peace in solitude," Evan added, glancing back at patient unknown briefly as he spoke. "Here I can help people without being overwhelmed by numbers." Patient unknown nodded again, but felt the question linger unspoke. And was this life truly peaceful for him? Or was it just a different kind of burden? "Anyone waiting for you?" Evan asked gently then. The woman stiffened slightly at his words, feeling her own heart speed up unexpectedly. The truth behind them had little to do with anyone actually expecting or needing hair, and everything about how long she had gone without admitting the answer even to herself anymore. "I have responsibilities," patient unknown replied carefully, after a moment of hesitation. Evan nodded understandingly, but there was something in his expression that spoke of deeper insight into what lay beneath those words, a look which made the woman's heart twist uncomfortably within her chest as she met his gaze again, trying not to give away too much. "That is not the same thing as someone waiting," he observed quietly. Patient unknown looked down then at their path ahead, where rocky patches dotted the landscape unevenly. She could feel Evan's eyes on her still, but said nothing for several long moments before finally speaking in a soft voice barely above a whisper. "No." When they reached his outpost, patient unknown entered more willingly than ever before, almost as if stepping into some form of sanctuary rather than just another temporary shelter during exile from home. Day 18 found them both within the medical bay again, but this time not solely focused on Evan's efforts to mend her body. With wounds largely healed now and Evan having long since moved beyond immediate life-saving measures, she began assisting him with smaller tasks around the spacious shift, which seemed equally beneficial for both of them given how much more relaxed they appeared when engaged in these shared activities. Organizing supplies became a kind of dance between them, patient unknown moving to retrieve this or that as Evan worked beside her, their hands brushing gently whenever either one needed something held steady. They began making terrible jokes. Evan's attempts at humor did not always land, but his efforts earned him more than just smiles from the once imperial woman. "Ever heard of a doctor who moonlights as an astronaut?" Evan joked suddenly while rummaging through supplies for some missing bandages on her last checkup day. "That's me right here." Patient unknown paused mid-task, to look at him. Thina, mix of bemusement and amusement coloring her features, despite everything she had faced previously in life. These moments shared now brought forth unexpected reactions from someone accustomed only ever reacting rather than simply feeling free emotion. "Tell me about Earth," patient unknown requested quietly instead of answering back immediately with a joke of her own. She was curious, genuinely interested in learning more about this place beyond what might be necessary for survival alone. Evan nodded at the request and launched into descriptions of cities far away from here, crowded metropolises filled with lights at night, sprawling countryside dotted by farms and small towns alike, vast oceans lapping against endless coastlines under sunsets so golden they nearly burn through one's retinas just looking at them. As he spoke, patient unknown listened intently to every detail, no matter how mundane it might seem compared to her own experiences. "You haven't told." Day 22 had dawned calm and uneventful, much like all the days before it. Dr. Evan Cross found himself breaking his routine to cook a simple breakfast for two in the small kitchenette of his outpost's medical bay. Patient unknown sat quietly on one side of the makeshift table he'd set up amidst spare equipment and sterilized instruments, her long white hair partially concealed by bandages, but still visible under the flickering lights. "Morning," Evan greeted with an easy smile as she entered the room, eyes following him as always, now more curious than before. The days spent together had brought a familiarity that neither of them could ignore or turn away from, even if patient unknown's identity remained a mystery. Patient unknown nodded in acknowledgement, but didn't speak immediately. Instead, her gaze lingered on Evan as he placed plates down with care and efficiency she admired deeply. They ate silently for several moments, until the tension seemed to build around them again. She watched him cut his food carefully before meeting her eyes across the table. "What?" he asked softly, after a few seconds of this unspoken dialogue, setting aside his utensils briefly, out of concern that something was bothering patient unknown more than usual. She looked away quickly and paused chewing thoughtfully for several beats. "Nothing," she finally replied, but there was no conviction in her tone as it had always been before. She tried again. I do not deserve this." Her eyes darted back to his, with uncertainty now clear on her face. Evan set down his fork completely and reached out a hand across the table, offering comfort without words, even though they were still strangers in so many ways beyond what had happened these last few weeks. "Deserve what?" he asked gently but firmly. Patient unknown gestured around them to all of it, their makeshift living quarters turned into her sanctuary for as long as she could stay here undetected. The way Evan treated her despite everything they didn't know about one Anna, there just peace and kindness in a world where both were rare luxuries. "This," she began softly, but then her voice cracked slightly from emotion. "Peace or kindness?" Evan took a breath himself before speaking again. We all carry burdens, Sierra. That doesn't mean you don't deserve to be treated with care." She blinked rapidly as tears welled up in her eyes and looked down at their hands on the table, her fingers curling slightly inward against his warmth, hesitant, but longing for more than just this contact. "You would not say that if you knew," she whispered finally. He squeezed her hand gently. Then tell me." She opened her mouth once to speak several times, before closing it again, with a shuddering breath of hesitation. But Evan's unwavering gaze, and the strength he offered made something within her break free, even just for these few moments, under his watchful eye. The blaring alarm cut through their fragile quiet like a knife slicing through butter, both freezing in place as they stared at each other one last time before turning back to reality, intruding harshly upon them. Multiple ships had entered orbit above the outpost, and Evan rushed over immediately, checking scanner readings with hurried motions despite his growing concern. "Those are Volcari warships," he said finally, after a brief moment of silence amidst the alarms going off around them and warning signals. "An entire fleet." He turned back to patient unknown then, whose expression, had shifted suddenly from one of vulnerability to regality once more, her deep violet eyes hardening behind their bandages. "They found me," she stated simply without looking away from Evan's face for confirmation or fearfully resolve now rising up within her in waves as strong and clear as ever before. She rose slowly despite any pain lingering inside her body, because this was the moment when everything came crashing back down upon them with finality none could avoid. Evan stared at patient unknown, his eyes wide but steady. "Sarah?" The communication system crackled sharply then, as an unfamiliar voice cut through their tension and growing anxiety. "This is Admiral Krex of the Volcari Empire," it intoned coldly over static noise connecting them with distant speakers far out in space. "We are searching for a fugitive who crashed here recently. Surrender her now or face consequences." Patient Unknown's grip tightened on whatever lay nearest to hand as she met Evan's eyes fully. "Then he is lying," she said softly but surely, standing tall despite any weakness still hiding beneath the surface of her recovery and survival thus far. "Krex shot me down when I fled for my life." Evan processed this with a blink before turning back towards Ciro, once more searching within those now clear violet eyes for confirmation beyond mere words. In times like these where facts could not tell everything needed to be known between them anymore, he said softly but firmly, then moving closer despite Dr. Evan Cross stared at patient unknown, his eyes wide but steady as he processed her words and the situation unfolding around them. The outpost's alarms blared incessantly in the background, a stark contrast to the calm resolve displayed by Seraphine Volcari. "She is lying," she said firmly, though her voice trembled slightly with unshed emotions. "Admiral Krex betrayed me. He shot my shuttle down when I fled for my life." Evan nodded slowly, understanding washing over him in waves as he realized the gravity of their situation. The Volcari fleet had indeed arrived, and the presence of Admiral Krex was confirmation that the coup against her rule had escalated beyond what either could have anticipated. "Is there anyone else you can trust?" Evan asked gently, his hand reaching out to rest lightly on hers despite the chaos surrounding them. Seraphine's violet eyes met his with a mixture of gratitude and determination. "There are loyalists who believe I am dead," she replied softly but resolutely. "They have been hiding for years, waiting for this moment." Without another word, Seraphine began typing rapidly on the communication device Evan had brought into her makeshift quarters. The screen flickered to life as she sent a coded signal, secretive and urgent. "Who are you sending it to?" Evan asked, his curiosity piqued despite his fear of prying too deeply. "To loyal forces who still believe in justice," Seraphine replied cryptically, but with an undercurrent of hope. "They will understand." Minutes ticked by agonizingly slow as they waited for a response from the outside world. The blaring alarms continued to fill their quarters, echoing ominously off the walls and amplifying Evan's anxiety. Suddenly, there was movement beyond the outpost's boundaries. Warships that had once belonged to Admiral Krex began turning tail in retreat, while new vessels entered orbit with precision and purpose. Loyalists who answered Seraphine's secret call. "We won," she whispered after a long moment of tense silence, her eyes reflecting disbelief and relief intermingled. "They are surrounding Krex's fleet." Evan looked out the window at the rapidly changing landscape above their heads, his heart pounding with exhilaration despite everything else going on around them. The coup was over. Seraphine had won back control of her empire. But victory did not bring a sense of triumph to Seraphine's face as Evan expected it would. Instead, there was an almost melancholic heaviness settling upon her features, her eyes, distant and lost in thoughts neither could comprehend fully from where they stood. "Big change from yesterday," Evan said softly, after several minutes passed by quietly between them amidst the escalating turmoil outside their quarters. Seraphine nodded silently as she watched loyalist advisors begin setting up a command post nearby. The stark reality of her life changing back to what it had been before crashing onto this remote outpost settling heavily around her shoulders once more. "Yes," she said simply, her voice devoid of any joy or satisfaction in the turn of events. "Do you want me to leave?" Evan asked gently, after another pause stretched between them. Unsure how much longer they could continue on like this without confronting the inevitable shift coming their way, regardless of personal feelings and desires intertwined amidst medical care turned into shared humanity for these few weeks together. Seraphine met his eyes, a flicker of something akin to desperation in her gaze now as she struggled with what was happening. "I have responsibilities," she replied quietly yet firmly, nodding towards the ever-growing command center taking shape beyond their makeshift quarters, without any space left untouched amidst newfound loyalty and allegiance rising up against those who had sought to usurp her rule. Evan's breath caught in his throat, knowing that whatever decision Seraphine made next would fundamentally alter everything for them both. An advisor approached her cautiously from the growing hubbub of activity surrounding their small outpost, now transformed into a strategic battleground once more amidst distant stars and closer human kindness, alike converging unexpectedly under one sky. "Your Majesty," the advisor called out respectfully despite obvious tension still lingering heavily between this newly reclaimed territory controlled by Seraphine versus Admiral Kreck's retreating forces. "The shuttle is ready for departure." Seraphine paused, taking a deep breath, before turning back to Evan with an almost pleading look in her eyes, her hand reaching out towards him one final time amidst everything changing around them. "Wait," she said sharply, enough to halt the advisor mid-step while catching Evan's attention fully once more. "Evan, come with me." He blinked, his mind racing through countless scenarios and possibilities as he stared at Seraphine in disbelief, but also hope brimming just beneath surface-level thoughts swirling chaotically within him. "What?" he asked softly, but firmly, despite knowing what she was asking. How impossible yet irrevocably necessary it would be for both.